When we planned to do the conference, we were looking for some European speakers and or keynote speakers. And then I just contacted some people, and the people said to me, "Hey, you have to invite Lasse. You have to invite him." Okay. The same happened with Jürgen, but I will tell later on. And I said, "Okay, I don't know him, but let's see what happened." So Lasse is here. So welcome first. Thank you very much. And this is a trainer, a coach, a programmer, a consultant on Agile. And I'm happy that you're here. And I'm really keen to see what you are telling us. Thank you very much. Welcome. This is your audience. Okay.
So first of all, thanks, Jose, for inviting me. I've heard good things about the conference, so it's good to finally be here in person. And getting invited to speak is always a good excuse, so that's good. So I'm here to talk about stepping outside of your comfort zone. So we all have one, and Jose mentioned some of the things that I associate myself as. One of them being a programmer, because that's how I got into IT, and that's most of what I've been doing for my career. Working with programmers or working as a programmer. I'd like to start with a quiz because I think this is really interesting. So, what do you think is in common between top athletes and great software?
Practice.
Practice?
Performance.
Performance?
Obsession.
Doping, obsession.
No.
These are all very good, but the right answer is they're both tested frequently. Doping was pretty close. Yeah. This actually doesn't have anything to do with my keynote, but this was too good to me, so I just wanted to throw it out there. But this one is related to the keynote. So just think about yourself. When was the last thing you learned something really new? I'm not talking about learning a new tool for doing the same technique that you've done before, but something really new that you didn't know before. Did anyone learn something like that this week? How about this month? What did you learn, Brett?
Well, I've never actually done real game programming, and since UI work is where I know I'm at, because I decided to do something UI-centric, and I decided to go for the hardest thing I could imagine. And so now I'm working on creating a stupid little game that actually is graphic-oriented and eventually with a social network built into it. And I've got to start on that. And I'm learning about how to represent things on graphics image, scaling, resizing, efficiency, and a whole bunch of things. And it's very different to how I'm normally used to programming, because I'm normally middle tier and back, which honestly the middle tier is a lot easier than dealing with front end, in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Did everyone hear that? Just checking.
No?
So, in short, and let me know if I totally abuse your words here, but basically Brett has been used to working on the server side, and now he's in the past month he's started doing game programming, so a graphical game of some sort. Fair? That's a big step for a programmer. I can imagine a lot bigger steps outside your comfort zone, but that's very good. So it's not like we do this every day. It's not every day that we actually take ourselves from the place where we feel like we know stuff and we're good at this stuff and walk over the other side where we know that we don't know anything about this thing and we feel really, really insecure about it. So it's not common. I hope that I can sort of inspire you to do some of that more frequently than before. About my background, I work as a consultant at Reactor. And this talk I'm going to tell you a few stories. Some of them are from my time at Reactor. Some of the stories are from my experiences before joining Reactor. So before Reactor, I was a consultant elsewhere, and then before that, I was working in a product company. And I'll start with a story from that product company. This is roughly a bit more than 10 years ago, I think. So ePrint is the name of a product for the printing, the online print industry. So the idea was that you can create your print products like your company's annual statement online digitally in your web browser, and then you can order color prints from our offsite print, which we're owned by an actual print company. So you could create your product online and press a button, and you'd get the actual boxes to your house or office, more likely. We had the user interface translated to Finnish and Swedish, of course. Those are the official languages in Finland. And then and English, of course, which is actually much more widely spoken than Swedish. But anyway, so this is fairly standard. Almost all the sites in Finland are translated. If they're translated at all, they're translated to these 3 languages. So that was fine for us for a long time. But we wanted to see if we can actually take our software and sell it elsewhere. Personally, I wasn't too interested in that because that means trouble. But our sales guys were really into taking the product that we have and just getting more customer base. So we're a small company and we're kind of cheap, and we looked for translation services. We found out that translating something it's about as expensive as getting a lawyer do something for you. So it was very expensive to us. So we decided to do something a bit cheaper. We decided that I'm going to translate our user interface, and then we'll just send the property files that I've translated to the translation agency, and they'll check them for a much smaller fee. So I do the hard work, and they just correct my few mistakes. The problem is, of course, that we started with French, and I don't know French. I've never studied. Actually, I've studied French for 1 week or less until I decided that I don't like the teacher, and I quit. But I could do this. The first few translations, I looked at the English word, and I found that the translation looks very much alike. I started seeing patterns. A word that looks like this, there's this prefix that belongs in front of it. And it turns out that it's correct. The pattern repeats. So I did this more and more, and actually I was done much faster than I thought. It was Italian, the same thing. I look at the word, it's a bit more complicated, but I started seeing things like DM. In Italian, that means double M. Tion, zione. Simple. So I did the same thing for Italian. Now this was time before Google Translate was, so that was actually much more effective than Google Translate at the time. Well, after these 2, German was a piece of cake, of course. How unimaginative have to be to not invent a different word for administration? Anyway, so I did the translations, and I was figuring that I got some of them right, and there's probably a few mistakes somewhere. So I sent the property files to the translation agency. 2 or 3 days later, I get an email back saying, we checked your translations. We've attached the corrected translations here, and invoice coming. So out of curiosity, I wanted to know how well I did. So I took the property files, and I took the originals and I diffed them. I checked for the differences. Where did I get wrong? How applicable is the L apostrophe pattern? there were no differences at all. Nada. I got perfect score. I figured I can do this. Actually, I can do translation for languages I don't know. And I probably spent about a day translating our interface to all 3 languages with perfect score. Okay, thank you. So I figured that there might have been other truths that are conceivable, but I figured that it's not like I can't do anything if I can't do a perfect job. Again, if the alternative is to not translate at all, at least we can show the software to our French users, and first they'll curse at us for not being French, and second, they'll actually think about, is this a product I want to know more about? So it's actually probably good enough, even though it's full of mistakes. Another project I was on, EPM, has nothing to do with print, despite the pattern. You see the pattern? ePrint, EPM. This one was a big corporation. So this was when I moved to consulting, and I joined Accenture, and yes, I survived. But we worked on these enterprise applications. This was one of them. It was a project management software for hardware installation projects. So these were projects that required a lot of logistics, moving stuff from one place to another, or actually several places to one place, around the same time, but not exactly at the same time, because you don't want to have everything lined up on top of each other, and I want the box in the bottom, thank you. That's not a good way to do it. So we figured that it needs a lot of sophisticated features, and we started building them. And it was actually quite interesting as a project. A lot of good people. I enjoyed my time there. My pet peeve was that we had a test manager. The test manager obviously had his title based on seniority, the other kind of seniority. Because all he would do was to execute the test scripts that were written. And it was really bugging me, because I knew that that's not testing, and that's not what you're supposed to do. We could do that equally well, but he just wouldn't do anything else. We suggested test automation. Sorry, I don't do that. So what we ended up doing is we let the test manager run his test scripts, but we stopped listening, basically. It's sad, but that's what we did. So we stopped listening, and we started doing stuff ourselves. We built before Fitness, Selenium, we built our own Excel-based test automation tools. And this was actually the first time I saw an actual customer, a business unit representative, create automated tests, automated acceptance tests. We should really pick this up. But we had to do it on ourselves. Our test manager wouldn't participate. He didn't want to learn anything new. He wanted to stay in his comfort zone. Now, this brings me forward a few years. In 2008, I was at the British Computer Society testing conference, and I gave a talk titled, "Who Tested My Cheese?" And the key message basically was that we're living in a time where we cannot just close our eyes and pretend that the world isn't changing, pretend that we don't have to learn anything new. So for all these years, we've sort of considered, as an industry, we considered testing as a necessary waste. If you could do without it, it would be obvious. No testing. That's been the attitude for a long time. Now, we do recognize that it's a necessary waste, So we want to do it, and we want to improve on how we do it. And for a long time, we've looked at automation to help us do it better. Again, to reduce the boredom of running regression tests. And from a more pragmatic perspective, to actually be able to do it frequently enough. So this is no news, and you know about this. I think we all agree that test automation is something we need to do in some way to be able to run regression tests. Some of us put it a bit more bluntly. Uncle Bob has said that manual testing is immoral. And if you fast forward to the end, letting computers run tests, they do it better, and they free our time, the sapient time, to do something more creative, something that we humans are good at. So for some reason, our test manager just didn't think the same way. He considered that the best thing that test managers can do is to execute scripts. At the same time, the software industry, the open source community is just blooming with automation tools. I took I did a small script that scavenged SourceForge and just looked for the open source projects with the word testing, either in the short description or the title or something. And I saw a clear pattern. It's growing like hell. And actually, I think that there's got to be more than a couple testers out there, maybe in this room, who are seriously pissed. After all those years, you've been saying that programmers should test their code. And then it's a programmer called Kent Beck who actually makes unit testing sexy. Anyway. So the trend is there. I also looked at how do we value test automation, or developing tests versus doing scripted testing. And I looked at Microsoft. At some point when I looked at it, they had 11 positions open for something they called software test engineer, STE. At the same time, they had almost 700 positions for something they call software development engineer, test. The essential difference is the SDET, they do test automation. And the first group, they don't, I guess. So this tells something about what the industry as a whole is looking for. The demand for tester programmers is much higher than non-programmer testers. Now, if you look at job sites like IT Jobs Watch, which actually gives you some statistics, so this is the average salary for UK-based jobs for software test engineers, and you compare that to something called a test development engineer, you get more pay. It correlates with what we're looking for. And if you really want to make big bucks, you do test-driven development. The point here is that we cannot, as individuals, we cannot afford not to learn new things. And as companies, we shouldn't be satisfied with not learning new things. So, but let's talk about this a bit more. Why is it that we should transcend our current capabilities, our current skill set, that what we know and what we do? What's the benefit for the company? Some years back, this is I cannot name the company, but it's a big organization. On this project, they had something like 200 developers, including programming, testing, everything they did. And the organization looked a bit like this. They were trying to do Scrum, so they had a prioritized product backlog, and then they had a bunch of teams. I've only drawn 4 because lack of space. And all of those teams had their particular domain where they specialize in. some of them were technical components, some of them were actual functional domains that they specialized in, like performance testing, for example. Now, the problem was, when you'd move down to product backlog, you'd find that the work doesn't distribute evenly. So the blue team in this sprint happens to be very busy because there's twice as much work, that kind of work, that's high priority compared to the others. I mean, of course, the others also, they were busy all the time. They did 8 hours a day, or 10 hours, this is China. But the blue ones were busy, so they ask for help and they get help. Next sprint is the red team that's busy, they get help. That's how organizations grow to become multi-hundred, like several hundred people. Because we always have a bottleneck, and we always try to eliminate the bottleneck. One of the easiest ways is to hire somebody to fulfill that the missing piece there. Now, what we're actually doing here is we're reinforcing the existing system of being very highly specialized. Now, there's 4 people that can do the red stuff. You're not going to get rid of them because they're all the time they're busy. They can always find something useful to do and rephrase it so that it sounds really important, even though it's not nearly as important as the top of your product backlog would be otherwise. The same happens on a smaller scale. So if you look at a software team, look at their task board on the wall, what you probably see is some kind of an imbalance. Because also software teams have a bottleneck. If we are separated between, let's say, user interface designers, programmers, and testers, the work might look like this. The UI designer has just one thing ongoing, the testers only have one thing ongoing, and the programmers are busy doing all kinds of stuff. What would you do in this situation? What would you recommend? Mingle the roles? So what would you do in this particular situation? You walk into the room, and what would you say?
Well, if none of the UI designers or test designer can help coding, there's nothing much you can do besides bringing out another person. But if you try to bring your team to a more level of knowledge, they can help each other pass through the bottlenecks without outside help.
Mm-hmm. So if you can find a way to have the UI designer or the tester help the programmers, that sounds like a smart thing to do. It's kind of common sense. The big question is, can I be helpful? Can I help with this task or not? If you think back to Liz Keogh's keynote, I think a lot of us actually think that we're light sleepers. I'm a tester, I can't code. I mean, I can write some code, but I'm really not good at it, so I'm probably not much of help. The UI designer thinks exactly the same, and the coders think exactly the same about the other functions. But it's not true. It's just something we've made ourselves believe. So it's a phenomenon that we need to fight back on somehow. Whether it's just reminding each other every now and then, actually you can do a lot of things. You can translate the user interface to French. It'll suck, and you probably can't get into France anymore. But it's better than nothing. So the way I see that, as an industry, we're sort of on the scale from cooperation between roles and collaboration sort of within the two roles. We're pretty far at this end. We cooperate from our islands of specialty, and we're aiming at the same goal, but we stand in our own corners. And I suggest that if you consider the potential, we're way down here. We could do a lot more if we'd sort of move from the world of cooperation and start collaborating, breaking the roles. And we all know that, right? We just don't do it enough. So I suggest that when you walk out of that door, you have a great open space, you listen to a great closing keynote. Is Jürgen here? You owe me one. Go back and start promoting this move. We need to go from the era of cooperation between roles and move sort of up there towards the era of collaboration without boundaries. We've been talking about it for such a long time, we need to start doing it more. Go ahead, ask a question. Oh, sorry.
What is your suggestion on how we should do this? Because you're right. I mean, everybody talks about it, about cross-functional teams, and that we should do this, and I think we all probably agree that it's a very good idea, but in the real-life situation, real-life situation, like you said, it's not that easy to get. I mean, we are all specialized in something by education or by our preference, and what's a good way to get the team equalized, or try to get the team equalized and all across the board?
So personally, I believe in sacrificing yourself. So do the translation yourself, and just show an example. I think because we can only control ourselves, and if that has an influence, that's the easiest way to influence others. We might have other ways to influence people, but if you can do something yourself, it's a no-brainer. That's something that you don't have to ask permission for, most likely. It's not easy, really, because we sort of the sort of comfort zone that we have. We know the comfort zone really well, and we know that outside there is panic. We don't like that, and it's hard to take the first step, especially if you're the only one going from here, where you're very proficient and you're seen as very effective in what you do, obviously very valuable and a good person altogether. And if you move here, suddenly you see how others look at you differently. They see like, Jürgen knows nothing about this Java code stuff. He's useless as a programmer. It happens to be true. Not to pick on you, but but it's not actually true for people other than Jürgen. So.
But the thing is, it is true. Like in a team, it is true. There are people who don't know anything about they know a lot about it.
Mm-hmm.
So we would need a course or some sort of collaboration or something to get Jürgen and me and maybe others on track with Java.
Mm-hmm. So what could you do? I mean, pair people. Good. What else? Learn, pair again.
Do it when you have slack. So don't start when you're in a desperate mode. Try to do it when you have time, as well as when you're in desperate mode. There are no slacks.
So try to create Slack and use the Slack for learning. Trying to do the unfamiliar stuff when you have time, and it's not like life or death.
But even if you don't know how to code, as long as you can read and talk to a developer, I can sit beside him and be very useful. Thank you. I hope I could be very useful. Just sitting and reviewing or being the rubber duck, listening to him articulate his code. So coding might not be my passion, and I really don't care about service buses or something, but I can listen, and I can actually help that way as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be coding.
Yeah. And by the way, programmers don't like service buses. Architects do.
I second that motion.
But I think you can also do a lot beforehand, because if you know what kind of project you have and you know you're going to be coding Java, and as a tester you don't know anything about Java, you might beforehand, when it's not so busy yet, get a book or something, and or talk to the developer and let him tell you what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. These are all opportunities. These are all options that we could take. I mean, who knows if it works or not? But it doesn't cost that much to try. Maybe one of them actually works, and it might work really well. So, rather than acknowledge that we're light sleepers, let's chant that we're deep sleepers and see if we actually are. Maybe we turn out to be very, very deep sleepers. So there's another reason, another property of the human being that prevents us. It's a force that pushes us towards the core of our comfort zone. That's this mentality. I don't do that. That's not me. What I mean by this is that what we do at work pretty much equals our identity at work. And when we have this identity, we have this image of us at the workplace. Anything that contradicts that model of ourselves, that immediately sounds like danger. I'm not doing something I should be doing. I'm not doing something I can do. And others will see me not as a well-dressed male, but as a douchebag who doesn't know how to write Java code. And it's not true again, but that's how we immediately see ourselves. So attacking our identity, it's actually it's a very strong internal conflict. We don't like doing that, and work is such a big part of us. It's immediately in the conversation when we suggest some kind of a change, a move from our comfort zone outside of our comfort zone. So I suggest that work is not about us, but yet it's almost all about us. So the problem here is, of course, that it shouldn't be about us. We should acknowledge that we're people, and there's this whole social element to this. But when we talk about what we should be aiming at, if we look at the goals, what are we trying to achieve here? That shouldn't be about us so much. It should be about where we're going. So letting these things like what I do, how do I feel about doing it, and what are my beliefs, it all stands in the way of seeing more clearly about what we should be doing. One of the examples about this was what I call the UX wars. So back in around 5 years ago, Reactor, which was predominantly programmer-populated company, there were roughly 50 people, and we hired 2 interaction designers, professional trained user interaction designers. Now, the problem here, or the conflict was, user interaction designers are very particular about these things, such as the fact that it's much cheaper to iterate on a product on paper versus code. So if you can figure out that the solution doesn't work by just drawing it on paper and trying to simulate through scenarios, it's much faster, much cheaper than having somebody code it, test it, try it, and then redo it again. Now, at the same time, we're an Agile shop. People identify themselves as extreme programmers. We use Scrum. We mention these sort of acronyms: dry, wet, Yagni. No, wet isn't one of them. But it's a clear conflict. We're used to saying no upfront design, or no big upfront design at least, and somebody suggesting that we actually design the solution fully on paper and then claim, there, programming can start. It just doesn't match our beliefs. So this led to a lot of fighting because we had this conversation from positions. One was the position of a user interaction designer who was the kind of the parent here. And then there's the childish, naive, extreme programmer types who don't understand that what they do is not good for the product. It's just a waste of time. We could get this at the same result or better much faster if we did it my way. So we had this conversation from afar first, and it took almost a year before we actually understood that, yes, we agree. And that's because we started coming together, talking about these things face to face, and putting the product to the forefront. Not saying, well, what I do is this, but rather asking, what should we do to get there? That's our goal. How do we get there? So just stepping back from our identities and sort of cliques within the company, that's a key step, I think. It doesn't mean that we should let go of our specialties and our identity fully. It's just that we should put it aside for a while every now and then and actually collaborate without the boundaries. Another reason why we should consider sort of transcending beyond the functional roles and what we can do and what we can't do is this phenomenon called beginner's mind. The quote here, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, in the experts, there are few. What that means is essentially that when we know what we're doing, and we've done this for years, we develop a tunnel vision. We found a solution by trial and error, and we found a solution that works. We've done it plenty of times, and we've learned to adapt that solution to the context, because we know that the same solution doesn't work everywhere. But variations of this solution work everywhere. That's what we believe when we become experts. Now, on the other hand, there's the beginner who comes in and says, gee, I don't know anything about this. He has the exact opposite of tunnel vision, like huge peripheral vision. You can actually see his hands back there and all the way back there. He acknowledges that he doesn't know pretty much anything, so he's much more aware. He sees much more opportunities. Some of them might be stupid ideas, but some of them might be much better than the single solution that the expert knows and believes that will work really well. I bumped into this, the concept of beginner's mind through this paper. Arlo Belshi, 2004 maybe, wrote this paper about what they call promiscuous pairing and the beginner's mind. It was basically a case study from their company. They were in a rut. They had to make progress faster than they were currently making, or otherwise their business will basically collapse. And they knew that with our current ways we can't make it, so we have to start experimenting. So they actually started experimenting in these weekly iterations and systematically trying out different practices and see whether it makes us go faster or slower. What kind of effects does it have? What are the consequences of trying different ways of handling task ownership, or what I'm mostly interested here, how to assign tasks to people. So talking about assigning tasks, there's 3 common ways to do it. This pretty much catches them all. One is to ask who knows best. That's the guy to do it. The other one is who knows the least, and give the task to him. And of course, in theory, you could just randomly pick. Most people believe in one of the other 2 extremes. And when Arlo's team tried all these, they tried all 3. They found that systematically, when they assign task to the person who knew the least about the task, whether it's the feature, the functionality, or the technology involved, that strategy paid off the most. And it wasn't just in the long run, it was during the first week that it started paying off. And this is one of the beliefs that we have, that yes, we can do some cross-pollination and we can pair and learn a bit like that. But if we really want to get stuff done, we have to give it to the person who knows the best. That's one of the beliefs that we have, which might not be true. And I think in Arlo's case, they found that to not be true for them. They call this pattern the least qualified implementer, and I strongly recommend that you, afterwards, you type this into Google and go listen to the interview they've made. There's a podcast online where somebody, it might be Bob Payne, interviews Arlo Belshi about their experiences. It's a short clip, it's a short interview, but it was one of the revealing moments of insight for me in the past few years. Remember the division between the comfort zone and the panic zone? The least qualified implementer pattern, this phenomenon of beginner's mind at work, that actually teaches us that there's a third area in between, which is the learning zone. It's actually outside of our comfort zone where the learning actually really happens. We might learn to optimize locally and fine-tune our techniques and practices within the comfort zone, but the really big advances come from outside. So that's where we should be. That's where we should spend more of our time than within the comfort zone. So, for example, in the situation that there's a bottleneck within a team, maybe it's not such a bad idea to put a non-code literate UI designer to actually work on the coding tasks. He might not be typing at first, but that might actually be the fastest way to get things done, like really done. Related to this, I have a story about this project I was on a couple years ago. We were developing a web portal, especially a self-service / web store. So you could buy stuff and you could manage your subscriptions. You could get stuff delivered to your home and so forth. And we were three teams. They're slightly bigger than this, but I was lazy drawing them. And then we had some specialists. So there was this front-end guy whose job was to make things pretty. I mean, all of the programmers knew how to do HTML. They knew how to do web pages. But most of us didn't do too good a job at making them pretty and sort of in line with our user interface standard. We heard that there's such a thing. We never actually saw it. And then we had a user interaction designer who was also a specialist, and he was not full-time on this project. He was doing other things at the same company as well. So actually it was quite easy for us to look at the front-end guy and say, you're a bottleneck. The teams are turning up more web pages than you can clean up or write up front. So we need to figure out something else to do. So we did this training thing. So he stopped doing anything solo, and he started working with other team members, so that there's always somebody who's doing that work, either pairing with the specialist or doing something on his own, and then maybe an hour later going back together with the specialist. So again, he was split between the three teams. So that works pretty well. I mean, it's not actually that big a leap from Java code to HTML or CSS. It's text has rules, there's a syntax. So it's definitely a learnable skill. The interaction design was a bit more tricky. So interaction design, after the UX war of like 2005 and 6, it has become a bit of a source of pride for us. It used to be that we do rock solid software. We used to be proud of not having a single production defect in a year within the deployment, that kind of stuff. Later, it's moved more towards being really, really good looking software as well, that actually works, it actually supports the goals of the user. So more of a whole product view. Now, that creates a bar. So if the UX designer, the user interaction designer is our bottleneck, that means that these people are really scared of doing anything because it has to be up to our standards. And when the UX guy comes back, he'll shun me for like creating something so obviously not good a solution. So there was a big sort of hurdle, like a barrier to entry, doing anything in that area. Then this funny thing happened. Priorities changed surprisingly. This was like 1 or 2 days before the next sprint planning. We were doing Scrum, and suddenly this one thing that's fairly big in our product backlog, it jumps from the sort of like the semi-final group to the top of the final group. It's like the one thing that if we do anything in this sprint, this is the feature we do. It was a totally new user interface for a group of logistics people. So again, we were shipping in the back end. We were shipping stuff to our customers based on what they do online, and the logistics guys they weren't keeping up. So it had become important to help them keep up, and an automation solution was clearly useful. The problem was that this came up so suddenly that we kind of knew what the problem was, but we had no idea what the solution might be. So usually by this time, there's a user interface design that's been done on paper, and it's been tested with scenarios, sometimes with users. But this time we didn't have anything, and our user interaction designer was fully booked. So what are our options? Not doing it is not really a good option. Doing it badly sounds really bad, but do we have any other options? So what happens was I decided that I am a deep sleeper. I can do interaction design, and I'm bigger than the UX guy, so if he jumps at me, I'll hit back. And I did the best I could. So I'd gone through this one-day training. We like to train basically everybody who's interested in the different specialties, the special skills that we have. And so I'd have 1 day basic training on to learn the fundamentals of how do user interaction designers work. What's their method? What are the tools they use? What are the patterns that they often end up using? And so I had basic awareness. So I did the best I could, and the user interaction designer was in the same building, a lot of the time actually in the same floor, even in the same room, just doing something else that was also very important, just not for our product owner. So what I did was, anytime he'd walk by and I saw him, I would grab him and just pull him to my desk and say, "Here, 2 minutes, that's all I ask." And he would give me feedback, and obviously I'd made more mistakes than with the translations earlier. So I actually improved the design. What we actually ended up shipping 2 weeks later wasn't all bad. So we started doing this sort of by accident, But today we have 10 designers who are sort of apprentices. They might or might not do user interaction design full time. Some of them do it part time. I think most of them do it part time, next to programming tasks, for example. But they're all the time investing time in learning that particular skill better, because that's a bottleneck for us. So it's getting better. Oh. So it's not really just about testers becoming programmers, programmers becoming testers. It's also about everybody becoming UI designers, everybody talking to customers and users, trying to break as many boundaries as we can, as in the order of importance based on your current context. If you need the French translation, just fucking do it. Sorry. And this is really important, and it's hard to do. So one last story. This project that really made me happy, it's called Mobile CV. I don't know why, because basically the product, it's a startup that's trying to revolutionize the way companies recruit. So they're doing video message-based job interviews online, and try to help companies who want to hire, for example, 400 people for next weekend. They don't have time to do face-to-face interviews. It's almost impossible to get all of those people in the same physical location for the interviews. But they can do that kind of stuff with online solutions like this. So they're not just like fine-tuning a workflow that exists and is like being tried and tested. They're trying to come up with a totally new workflow. So they know that they don't know pretty much anything about how the users perceive these features, the functionality, the design they're coming up with. So they have to talk to the customers. They have to talk to the users. They have to do a lot of stuff that they don't like doing. That's what makes me really happy when I see things like this on my Twitter feed. Michael, not an introvert, but definitely not into cold calls. He's calling customers, not exactly in my comfort zone, doesn't exactly matter if it isn't. I think that's very much the key of the whole thing here. It doesn't matter what we do, what we know best. The only thing that matters right now is what needs to get done. I wanted to summarize sort of the key ideas here and from the conference as a whole. And I started collecting this list of bullet points. But then I realized that I really hate bullet points. So I decided that I'll step outside of my comfort zone and I'll make a music video. I can't do everything myself, so I got a band together, a group of French rappers, and I provided subtitles for you because I believe that most of you don't speak French.
Tirer une tête dans le terrement, rire à 100 pisser dessus le bonheur, on le convoite tellement qu'il n'y a plus moyen qu'on reste en chien, je te le dis clairement. Les gens, les sentiments, j'en fais abstraction, pas un sentiment. Poche d'où ma réaction, tous mes proches sont sous tension, sang va être pour la plupart. On prêchant, doigt on terre, si embrouille avec le dard. Et certi part, des phrases qui blessent comme des coups de chlasse. On se barre bien, j'échappe de mes faiblesses et après relasse. Ici on soigne tous, c'est la médecine douce. Hélas la vie est une sacrée tâche, une bonne tâche tous. Et là je touche, le fond les cernes sous mes yeux prennent forme. Au fond tu pourras les lire, je suis un jeune qui pète pas la forme. Et le visage à mes gris, d'un rap dégris physique ingrat. Autour de moi tout part en vrille, si tu as sont plus que de gras. Rien de marrant, c'est ta petite, c'est que nous mourrons. Je crois qu'il y a vraiment de quoi se faire.
Questions? So, okay. First there, you're second. Okay.
as you said, it's very hard to make people get out of their comfort zone. Do you have any tips on how do you manage to push them out?
Well, showing example is my favorite, as I said. What you can do if you're in a position, for example, that you can influence corporate policy. Well, if you were, you could do a lot of things in that area. And then there's whoever you know outside of the team, for example. Try to get them buy into this idea and make it safer to try. So a lot of the new things that we don't feel like doing, they seem dangerous. They seem like the world is going to fall apart if I don't make it, and the odds are that I'm not going to make it because I can't do that stuff. If you can break apart these fears into like more specific things, maybe you can cross them off. Like, well, the world doesn't actually fall if you don't make it on time. So pick something that's not so critical. Make it easier to fail.
That works for me, but what about the others?
Well, you could do the same for others. So help them see that it's not the most critical thing. For example, suggest that they try it on something that's obviously it's interesting enough, but it's not mission critical. Try to make them, in general, try to make failure easier or safer. There was another question.
Yeah, I was wondering about this paper about the least qualified implementer. I wonder, I read the paper actually. It's a really interesting idea, but I wonder, did you try it, and what was your experience with that?
I haven't done it in the scale that they did. So basically, they found that they always pick the least qualified implementer, and that worked best for them. I haven't tried that myself. On the other hand, we do have fairly, let's say, balanced or homogeneous teams. So there's no huge gaps. So it's actually easier to do something that you're not quite proficient with. It doesn't seem so much like outside of, not too far from my comfort zone. So it would be good if I could do that, and maybe I can now that I'm sort of publicly suggesting that others should try it.
All right. Thank you.
More questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great.